There's no comparison because what Biden has done is refuse to address the structural inequities. He, of course, campaigned on $15 an hour and then walked away from it. He campaigned on checks for $2,000, which is ridiculous to mail a one-time check of $2,000 to families that are overwhelmed by credit card debt, medical debt, behind on their rent payments, unemployed or underemployed. These are really token gestures. If you look at the sum, we don't know the final figure, but 1.9 trillion for the COVID relief bill, the ARP, and then somewhere around 3 trillion, it's not determined yet, for infrastructure spread out over several years. Almost all of this money is going into the hands of large corporations. In terms of the COVID relief bill, it's a windfall of tens of billions of dollars for the for-profit pharmaceutical and insurance industry. In terms of infrastructure projects, again, that money will go either through state offices to large corporations that do infrastructure work. Part of the reason that our infrastructure is in such distress is because it hasn't been maintained with falling tax rates. Even this supposed increase in the tax rate that Biden is proposing is just pushing us back to where it was roughly before Trump cut it. So it's very different from FDR, who, as you said, put 12 million people to work, created Social Security, lifted the ban on all sorts of labor unions, which empowered the working class. So I worry that by the end of this year, all of that money is going to be gone. Unemployment benefits are extended until July. You have a tax credit for children. The moratorium just gets extended. I think now it's extended till June, but I think it's 20% of renters, by that figure right, can't meet their monthly payments. And so now they're waiting on a knife's edge to see whether whether the moratorium will be extended beyond June. And if it won't, we're talking about millions, probably tens of millions of families being evicted from their homes. So yes, it's extremely disappointing. And what's even more disappointing is the kind of gushing embrace of, this is somehow radical change on the part of the press. David Brooks is writing columns lauding all of this. But it doesn't structurally change anything. And by the end of the year, everybody's going to be back where they are. And that's very dangerous because it is exactly that disenfranchisement, that dislocation, that abandonment of the working class that gave rise to the phenomena of Trump. Trump didn't create it. Trump catered to it. It was there long before Trump arrived. I think you found it expressed through the Christian right. I wrote a book on the Christian right, American Fascists, the Christian right in the war in America. I did not use the word fascist lightly, but all of this kind of magical thinking, white supremacy, rampant militarism, homophobia, all of that was embodied in the Christian right that Trump tapped into, and that's still there. In fact, it's going to be worse, and I fear that the legacy of the Biden administration is that it delivers to us a competent demagogue instead of an incompetent one.
And you referenced the role of the media and the way that the media has been treating Biden. I've never in my life, Chris, seen a level of propaganda around a Democratic president or a president in propping him up that I've seen around Biden. I mean, the effort to portray him as this kind of like, reforming, emerging after decades of service, to almost a half a century of service to Wall Street, to the military-industrial complex, to now portray him as this like born-again progressive figure because he's raising corporate taxes from 21% to 28% when Trump lowered it from 35%. So he's taking it half of the way back up. And I just read this morning from the New York Times to get their daily newsletter this kind of incredible portrayal. There's just no context. It's completely detached from that. It's treated as if Biden is raising corporate tax rates. Of course, the fact that he is putting children back in detention centers at the border is basically not discussed again, or if it is, it's just completely apologized for. I just read today as well that Biden, who came into office preaching Black Lives Matter, preaching racial equality, against white supremacy, systemic racism, and who kind of cloaked himself in the Black Lives Matter movement and the movements of the summer, that he is actually arming police in the United States with a greater degree and value of weaponry, military weaponry, than even Trump was. And so I wonder, just what would you say about that, and the role of the media as a society descends in the way that it is today into authoritarianism?
Well, I would say the media was pretty bad under Obama too. I mean, nobody looked at Obama's policies. They looked at the fact that he was a person of color and young and charismatic, and kind of ignored what his policies were, which were as bad or worse than Biden's. Obama's assault on civil liberties actually outdid those of George W. Bush. He immediately, as soon as he took office, catered to Wall Street instead of the victims that had suffered under fraud from these large financial firms and banks. I mean, that's part of the bankruptcy of the media. It's all about image as opposed to substance. So I think that failure on the part of the media to report accurately and honestly has preceded the Biden administration, although you're perfectly right that the reporting has been appalling. Biden was one of the primary architects of that Democratic decision led by Clinton to transform the Democratic Party into the Republican Party and essentially push the Republican Party so far to the right it became insane. That was all Biden. The omnibus crime bill, he was a major author of the Patriot Act. The omnibus crime bill vastly expanded our prison population, militarized our police. Biden bragged about it at the time. I think he increased the number of federal crimes that merited the death penalty from a handful, 1 or 2, to 50. He used to go, I think, 51. He used to walk around and bragging about it. He, under Clinton, they were responsible for doubling and tripling sentences. So you have 40%. We have 25% of the world's prison population. We're 4.4% of the world's population. 40% of the people in our prison population have never been charged with physically harming another person. We have people serving life sentences for drugs. That was all Biden. And, of course, the militarization of the police was all Biden. And I think that's part of the problem with the liberal class, is that they don't have any real contact, or they don't have relationships with people who have suffered from these kinds of policies. I teach in a prison. Half of my students wouldn't be in that classroom but for Biden and Clinton. And I don't know how, and not only have they suffered horrendous injustice, but so has their families, their children. I don't know how you could walk out of a prison classroom and then turn around and vote for Biden or support Biden. But I think that there's, for so much of the liberal elite, the suffering in this country is very real, not only among communities of color, but among the white working class. And much of my family comes from the white working class in Maine. That's all real. And to write these people off either as super predators if they're black, or as deplorables if they're white, just shows how bankrupt the liberal elite itself is. And of course, that is, I think, portrayed in the kind of echo chamber that has built up around Biden, as you correctly point out, lauding what are very meager, crumbs really tossed to working men and women, while once again, Wall Street and large corporations swallow staggering sums of money. This is just a playbook that we've seen going back to 2008. And that's what Biden's continued. But it's a very dangerous route, and it's one that's going to, I think, has potential political consequences that are very grave for the country.